A contract killing. A brutal murder. A neighborhood in chaos. For the New York City Police Department and the FBI, New York City becomes the front lines in a relentless battle. The enemy, powerful drug dealers who will stop at nothing to protect their profits.
In the 1980s, the drug trade in New York City was a nightmare. Dealers made millions. Street violence was out of control. The NYPD battled the drug gangs, only to become their target. I'm Jim Kellstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. Hundreds of FBI agents and police officers launched a bold plan to stop the violence and shut down the gangs' deadly business.
In New York City in the 1980s, the NYPD was fighting a losing battle against the drug lords.
Okay.
NYPD Detective Sergeant Mike McGinnis worked narcotics in the borough of Queens.
There were several major organizations selling cocaine and heroin in southeast Queens, and one of them was Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols' organization.
26-year-old Queens native Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols is a drug wholesaler. He distributes cocaine and heroin to mid-level dealers. His price for a kilo of coke is $50,000. He's worth millions. Nichols protects his operation by surrounding himself with a tight group of loyal associates. Many are family members. For police in Queens, cracking Nichols' operation will not be easy. His headquarters is at a deli at 107th Avenue and 150th Street in Jamaica, Queens.
We had conducted surveillances there. We had talked to many informants there. We had done a lot of buy and bust operations there, where we'd send out undercovers and buy drugs, and it was a continuing problem in the area. But we couldn't really make a case at that point against Fat Cat or any of the principals in his organization. That all changed in July 1985. One of our units was doing a buy and bust operation and developed some information that led us to get a search warrant for Fat Cat's grocery store and for an apartment above the grocery store. The informant told us that there was weapons, cash, and numerous drugs stored there. Myself and two detectives went into the grocery store. I went behind the counter and I walked towards the rear of the counter, and I saw there was a light on in the back room. So I went into the back room. There were three men behind a big desk, and I realized one of them was Fat Cat Nichols.
Nichols, put your hands up on the wall. Put your hands up on the wall. Put your hands up on the wall.
Police order the men up against the wall.
Put your hands on the wall, now. Hands up.
Nichols reaches down for something.
Check the chair over here. You understand?
Under a towel on the chair where Nichols was sitting,
Check the chair.
detectives find a loaded automatic and a revolver.
Those are mine, man. Those on that table, dog.
Police search the room and find heroin, cocaine, and $30,000 in cash. Several ounces of marijuana is on Nichols' desk.
The raiding party that went to the second floor apartment found $150,000 in cash in boxes.
Wow, that's a lot of cash.
Hundreds, perhaps thousands of pieces of cocaine, street cocaine wrapped in tinfoil, and glassines of heroin and additional weapons.
Nichols is arrested on drugs and weapons charges. 24 hours later, he's free on $70,000 bail. At the time of his arrest, Nichols was already on parole. He reports to his parole officer to see if the arrest violated the terms of his parole. He tells his parole officer, Brian Rooney, that he was only in the grocery to order a sandwich.
You take care of this for me, man.
That's what we're going to try to do.
All right, thank you. Just have a seat right here.
Okay?
All right, thanks.
Rooney calls McGinnis to check his story out.
So I told him what had happened, that we had arrested Nichols in the grocery store, that he had a number of weapons, but unfortunately he made bail, and I'm sure he's gone. And Rooney said to me, no, he's not. He says he's sitting outside my office here.
Rooney rearrests Nichols on the spot for violating his parole.
Now, for Nichols, what that meant was, even though he had made bail on the case where we got him, he was in on the parole violation, and there's no way around that. You can't get bail on it. So not counting the trouble that he was in with me, he owed 14 years to the state. So he was in big trouble.
A week later, McGinnis and Rooney testify at Nichols' parole hearing.
I briefly described what had happened that night, and the adjudicator immediately continued his violation of parole, which meant he was in. He was entitled to one more hearing like that, and then he would go back in for the remainder of those 14 years.
But the drug dealer has no intention of letting that happen. 2 months after the hearing, Nichols' parole officer Brian Rooney gives a co-worker a ride home from work. He drives through South Jamaica, a neighborhood in Queens. He knows this section of Queens is dangerous. But he has no idea he is being followed. Suddenly, a car pulls up beside him. Brian Rooney is shot once in the arm and once in the back. He dies instantly. His killers disappear into the night. Police arrive quickly, but there is nothing they can do. They process the scene and find little evidence. No shell casings were left behind. No one saw the shooting. News of the murder quickly reaches Detective Sergeant Mike McGinnis.
Sergeant who worked in my office called me up and told me about it. Said they just killed a parole officer up on Supton Boulevard, and it was Brian Rooney. He was a very fine guy and a good parole officer. He was just a real good combination of social worker, police officer. That's necessary to be a good parole officer.
Police hit the streets to gather intelligence and find the killer. Rooney's murder is the latest in a string of homicides in South Jamaica. Rival drug gangs battle each other for territory and control of the profits.
The homicide rate in that part of the city where the drugs were being sold was skyrocketing. Shootings were commonplace. Citizens were terrified to come out of their houses. And for that reason, we knew that we had no choice but to go after these drug gangs.
The NYPD steps up their efforts in Operation Cleanup, a major long-term anti-drug operation. They bring in hundreds of officers from precincts all over the city. The operation targets drug dealers in the Jamaica, Queens area where Rooney was murdered. Detectives also canvass the neighborhood near Sutphin Boulevard where the shooting occurred.
Hey man, come here for a minute.
They interview locals, hoping that somebody saw something out of the ordinary the day Rooney was killed.
What you want to know?
I know you heard about the parole officer that got shot, right?
Yeah, man, I heard about the parole officer that got shot. What you want to know about that?
You got any names? You heard anything on the
Two
street?
dudes is all I know. Two dudes.
That's all you can tell me.
Two dudes.
Police learn that two men associated with Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols were both seen in the area, Howard Mason and Perry Bellamy. Nichols had a strong motivation for killing Rooney. Investigators suspect he may have ordered Mason and Bellamy to kill his parole officer. In 1985, parole officer Brian Rooney is shot to death on a street in South Jamaica, Queens. Police suspect that one of his parolees, Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols, ordered the hit. Mike McGinnis, former detective sergeant with the NYPD.
We were all astounded with what happened to Brian Rooney, that they would have the audacity to kill him. But I think their thinking was if they got Rooney out of the way, Nichols would be able to make the street. And where they got that from, I don't know. But that was their thinking.
As the detective who arrested Nichols, McGinnis knows he could be next on the hit list.
I looked over my shoulder. I was careful, but I never let it stop me from what I was doing. To have it happen where somebody actually says, I'm going to kill this officer to get a benefit and to maybe get myself out of jail, that was very unusual. And I think people in law enforcement and the citizens in general found it kind of unnerving.
Police know that Howard Pappy Mason, a lieutenant in the Nichols organization, and Perry Bellamy, a Mason associate, were seen in the neighborhood the night Rooney was murdered. An anonymous caller claims Bellamy was outside the car when Rooney was shot. The next day, another informant tells detectives where to find Bellamy. The tip leads investigators right to him.
Stick your hands up on the wall! What? Stick your hands on the wall now! Stick your hands on the wall!
Bellamy is picked up on the street in his neighborhood and brought in for questioning.
I have a field day with this. You understand me? I got my rights.
He admits he saw Rooney just hours before he was murdered.
In the car with Rooney.
He claims he knew about the hit and tried to warn Rooney. That's why he was seen in the area that
You
night.
set him up, I think.
I know if something happened to a cop.
After
they'd be
hours
over
of
there looking
questioning,
for the rest of
detectives
us,
learn he
trying
did
to get
more
us.
than warn Rooney.
Look.
So that's who did it.
Bellamy
He- when
reveals he was
ordered-
in the car with Rooney the night he was killed.
You're just gonna add on more problems for yourself.
He says Howard Mason shot Rooney. Bellamy was in jail weeks before the murder. He claims to have overheard Nichols telling another inmate that his parole officer was going to get what's coming to him. Authorities charged Bellamy with aiding and abetting the murder of Officer Rooney. Next, detectives tracked down Howard Pappy Mason.
What's up, officer?
What's your name?
Mason.
All right, well, stick your hands up against the wall, folks.
Officer, I don't
Stick your hands on the wall. Give me a few minutes.
In the suspect's boot, they find a fully loaded .22 Derringer. Mason is charged with murder and weapons possession. Investigators have put the conspirators behind bars. But they can't prove Fat Cat Nichols ordered Mason and Bellamy to kill his parole officer. While police try to build a case against Nichols, who is still in jail, his organization continues to grow. In 1987, the illegal drug crisis in New York goes from bad to worse. A new drug explodes onto the scene.
The crack cocaine swept over the community. I've never seen anything like it.
FBI Special Agent David Higgins worked drug cases in New York.
Okay.
Basically, what happens in the preparation of crack, you can take a relatively small amount of cocaine and combining it with other ingredients, you stretch it tremendously so that something that might have been sold previously as a gram amount for $100 could turn around and make the drug trafficker $1,000.
The drug sells cheap, as little as $2 a vial, and it's highly addictive. For a working-class neighborhood like South Jamaica, crack cocaine is the perfect storm.
Because of the high level of addiction, the drug users were repeatedly looking to get high, and therefore they were out trying to find sources of income anywhere they could. Naturally, they turned to crimes such as burglary and robbery, and of course, the general level of crime in these neighborhoods increased as a result.
The NYPD steps up its efforts. They rename Operation Cleanup Operation Queens. In the early 80s, a federal organized crime drug enforcement task force was formed in New York City to go after the drug dealers and the major distributors. Special Agent Richard Martinez was assigned to the task force.
It was set up as an organization that utilized FBI, New York City Police Department, Drug Enforcement Administration, and other agencies to coordinate a direct attack against these elements.
Here it is, right here, South Jamaica, okay?
The OCDF task force was divided up into squads, and each squad had its own mission to accomplish. Our particular mission happened to be the cocaine, crack cocaine, and heroin dealers operating in the city.
The task force is investigating several drug gangs in Jamaica, Queens.
We felt that was the best thing we could do for the citizens in that community, was to get as much power into this group as that was going to go after these guys. As much power as possible.
Dealing drugs in South Jamaica, Queens is a lucrative business. The high profits lead to more competition and more violence. Nearly half the serious crimes in New York City are crack-related. In October 1987, a taxi dispatcher is murdered for testifying about a gun battle she witnessed. A month later, a Guyanese immigrant complains to police that drug dealers have been selling crack on his street. The next evening, someone firebombs his home.
Call fire department. What is number? 911.
Yeah, someone just threw something through a window.
NYPD officers from the 103rd Precinct in South Jamaica are assigned to protect the witness and his family. But the threats continue. Thomas Godbolt, a member of Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols' organization, approaches the witness on the street. Godbolt says he has 3 weeks to leave the neighborhood, or his entire family will die.
You understand me? I hate to say, man.
In 1987, drug dealers rule South Jamaica, Queens. Citizens brave enough to stand up to the dealers are intimidated and murdered. The New York City Police Department and a federal task force turn up the heat on all the drug organizations in Jamaica, Queens. They make over 2,000 arrests for the sale and possession of drugs in the 4 months between October 1987 and January 1988. In late January 1988, one of Lorenzo Nichols' lieutenants, Thomas Mustafa Godbolt, is sent to Rikers Island for threatening the Guyanese witness. On February 24th, Howard Pappy Mason, suspected of shooting parole officer Brian Rooney, is convicted on a weapons possession charge. The next day, Lorenzo Nichols is sentenced to 25 years to life on 11 counts of drugs and weapons possession.
We had cut off the head of the snake and caught a couple of his top people with him and had a great case, and so we really felt we had put that organization pretty much on the sidelines.
The NYPD and the FBI are making headway in the battle to take back the streets of South Jamaica from the drug dealers. But the war is about to take a dark turn. February 26, 1988. Just days after Nichols and Mason were convicted, Officer Edward Byrne is guarding the Guyanese witness. Even with the man who threatened his family in jail, the witness continues to receive threats. Byrne is a rookie, just 22 years old. This is just another routine night. At 3 a.m., a car drives past Officer Byrne's position. There are 4 men inside. The sedan drives around the block and out of sight. "20 minutes later, 3 men sneak up behind Officer Byrne's car. The witness hears the gunshots. At 3:28 a.m., dispatch sends out the call, "Officer down" in Jamaica, Queens. Police arrive at the scene minutes later. Both front windows of Officer Byrne's police cruiser have been shot out. The rookie cop is dead.
Every police officer responds to that. Every police officer takes that personal when a police officer is murdered.
The witness Officer Byrne was protecting tells police he heard the shots and saw several men get in a tan-colored car and speed away. Investigators find an abandoned 1976 tan Olds Cutlass parked about 2 miles from where Byrne was shot. They find nothing in the car linking it to the murder.
Right after the murder of Officer Byrne, the New York City Police Department started cracking down on all the drug dealers. A tremendous amount of heat was put on all the drug dealers in Jamaica, Queens. They wanted the murders of Officer Byrne.
Hundreds of police officers working 12-hour shifts blanket 3 precincts. The 103rd, the 105th, and the 113th in southeastern Queens. They raid nearly 200 locations and question more than 300 suspected drug dealers. Investigators believe Lorenzo Nichols ordered the murder of his parole officer from jail. And the man who threatened the witness Officer Byrne was protecting had ties to Nichols' organization. Nichols is a natural suspect. At the time of Officer Byrne's murder, several members of the FBI task force are investigating a Queens drug dealer with ties to the Nichols organization.
What we did was we simply shifted focus. We were looking at something called the Smith organization, who had dealings with a number of Nichols associates. We simply moved full power. We looked right at the Nichols organization because we were gaining intelligence from the same informants that were telling us about the Smith organization. They had intelligence on the Nichols organization. We targeted the members of the organization who were still on the street operating his drug conspiracy group.
To get inside the organization, investigators use a variety of weapons. They set up undercover drug buys and use telephone wiretaps. If Nichols was involved in the murder of Officer Byrne, he's just made the biggest mistake of his life. Now, the resources of the FBI, the NYPD, and the DEA are focused on bringing down his operation. A rookie cop is killed, shot to death on a street in New York City. 22-year-old Officer Eddie Byrne gave his life protecting a witness from a deadly drug gang. On February 29th, Officer Eddie Byrne is laid to rest. 10,000 police officers attend the funeral.
You can't kill a police officer and get away with it.
Special Agent Richard Martinez.
That's why police react so quickly. You can't kill a police officer and get away with it.
New York City Mayor Ed Koch vows to find those responsible. The city offers a $10,000 reward for information leading to the conviction of Byrne's killers. The community is outraged. After years of being intimidated, they are fed up with the drug dealers. Special Agent David Higgins.
Shootings would take place at any time of day. Many times bystanders, innocent bystanders in the neighborhood would be caught in the crossfire. And there were a number of notorious cases in which children were killed as a result of these shootings.
Police set up a hotline to field tips. They answer 400 calls every 8 hours. Within days, the reward money climbs to $130,000. 3 days after the shooting, an anonymous caller says he knows who shot the cop. The detective convinces the caller to meet him. The tipster tells police the shooter was Todd Scott. Police are familiar with Scott. He's a suspect in the murder of a prostitute. Detectives go looking for Scott. At the apartment of a relative, they find a witness who is willing to talk. He tells detectives he knows the men who carried out the shooting. He was present when the hit was planned. And he knows who ordered it. On February 24th, only hours after his conviction on a gun charge, Howard Mason called one of his dealers, Philip Copeland, from a payphone at Rikers Island. The next day, Copeland met with fellow gang members Todd Scott, David McClary, and Scott Cobb in an apartment 10 blocks from the murder scene.
Just got back talking to your boy Mason, man.
Copeland told them the boss is mad. He ordered them to hit a cop, any cop.
But we gotta take out a cop.
The price of the contract was $8,000.
Gotta take him out.
According to the informant, the men drew straws to choose the shooter. Todd Scott would pull the trigger.
There it is. Y'all got it, man. What you gonna do? That's what's up. That's what I like to hear.
The officer's fate was sealed. The next morning, Scott came back to the apartment bragging about what they had done. They only collected a few $100s of the $8,000 they'd been promised.
That individual told how the murder actually went down, who they chose, that it wasn't Officer Byrne chosen as an individual, but they chose the police officer that was guarding the cooperating witness's house, that he was a target of opportunity.
Howard Mason wanted Byrne's murder to send a chilling message to law enforcement.
Your reputation is everything on the street if you're a drug trafficker. If it's known in your neighborhood that you are unwilling to take violent retribution for acts against you or your organization, you're not going to last very long as a drug trafficker. This was a killing that really galvanized law enforcement in New York City. The execution of a uniformed police officer who's targeted not because of any particular act or case, but because he was a police officer in and of itself.
The NYPD finally have names to link to the shooting. They issue warrants for Philip Copeland, Todd Scott, Scott Cobb, and David McClary. Copeland is already in jail on another charge. Police go looking for the other 3 men. Later that same afternoon, Scott Cobb's mother calls police. She wants to arrange her son's surrender. He never shows up. Investigators believe Cobb will eventually contact his mother. They install a trap on her telephone line to catch the numbers of all incoming calls. The shooting continues to dominate the news, and police keep up the pressure on the street. It's not long before another important witness comes forward. A young woman tells detectives she witnessed the shooting of Officer Byrne. The woman said she was on the street when she heard a shot and saw men around the police car. She hid behind a car until the men left. She doesn't think they saw her. Investigators show the witness photo lineups. She confirms Todd Scott as the man she saw at the passenger window of the patrol car. She also identifies David McClary as the man standing by the driver's side window, and Copeland as the man she saw standing behind McClary. Police now have a witness to the shooting. They need to find the 3 suspects still at large. The day after the trap on Scott Cobb's mother's phone is set up, police get a hit. An incoming call is traced to an address in Queens Village. It's one of several safe houses owned by Howard Mason. On March 3rd, less than a week after the Byrne shooting, detectives spot Scott Cobb.
Hey, man. Freeze! Step down and put your hands behind your back. Slow, slow.
He is quickly taken into custody. Police search the safe house. In the basement, they find Todd Scott. At noon the next day, David McClary surrenders to police. He is accompanied by his mother. Of the 4 men accused of Byrne's death, McClary is the only one who doesn't have a criminal record. Todd Scott and David McClary give conflicting statements. Each accuse the other of actually pulling the trigger. All versions of the events place Scott Cobb behind the wheel of the getaway car. Police and prosecutors are eventually able to piece together this version of events. At 3:25 a.m., Todd Scott distracted Officer Byrne by tapping on the window on the passenger side of the patrol car. David McClary shot Officer Byrne 5 times through the driver's side window. Philip Copeland was just behind McClary. All 4 men are charged with second-degree murder. But for the agents and police, larger questions loom. Did Howard Pappy Mason act on his own? Was Fat Cat Nichols involved in the murder? And can they prove it? Police and FBI agents suspect one of 2 men is responsible for ordering the murder of a New York City police officer. Drug wholesaler Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols, or his former employee, Pappy Mason. Special Agent David Higgins.
The murder of police officer Byrne was a state investigation. It was conducted by the New York City Police Department, And while they conducted their homicide investigation, the federal authorities and the local members of the federal task force conducted a parallel investigation targeting the Nichols organization as a whole.
Investigators realized that it's not enough to put the organization's leaders and their lieutenants in jail. If they hope to stop the violence, they must destroy the gangs. Fat Cat Nichols' drug operation is huge. It brings in over $20 million a year.
We had already established through informant information that the Nichols Organization Nerve Center was the Big Mac Deli located in the Laurelton section of Queens, New York. We immediately obtained subpoenas to examine the telephone toll records for that location.
To investigate this large and dangerous organization, the FBI turns to wiretaps. Special Agent Richard Martinez is the assigned case agent.
Only that type of investigation can collect information on major conspiracies. When an undercover officer deals with one person buying drugs, he's dealt with one or two people. To get an enterprise or an organization, you need the ability to wiretap.
Agents wiretap Nichols' headquarters, but they immediately run into a problem.
The suspects involved in the Nichols organization were so paranoid about the attention of law enforcement in the neighborhood, which had occurred as a result of the Byrne shooting. They became convinced that they were the target of a wiretap. So they immediately shifted their operation to a new location.
The agents target Nichols' family. A week after the shooting, the FBI begins wiretapping Lorenzo Nichols' sister.
We knew that a lot of mid-level distributors were dealing with her. So hers was an ideal phone to get into. She was talking to Lorenzo Nichols. She was talking to about 12 mid-level distributors that she was bagging for. She was passing on instructions or conversations from the drug dealers to Lorenzo Nichols. She was in the middle of this whole organization, and that was the beauty of it. She liked to talk.
Nichols' sister is paranoid someone is spying on her.
Every day she was saying, my phone's tapped, don't talk. But then she would turn around and talk.
For one day.
At times she would leave the phone off the hook, which is basically a bug into her house. And you could hear her have conversations with these guys when they would pick up their drugs.
Hurry up. Go.
Over the wiretap, the FBI intercepts a key call between Nichols and his sister. They're talking about Pappy Mason.
In one particular conversation, she discussed why Pappy Mason had done that thing, a reference to the actual murder of Officer Byrne. And Lorenzo responded that he didn't know why he did it. Pappy Mason had a reputation of being a kind of violent guy, and Lorenzo, near the end, was kind of pushing him away, not really wanting to directly deal with him because he drew too much pressure from law enforcement. All indications prior to that Lorenzo Nichols was involved in this, but through that conversation, which was later backed up with debriefing of cooperating witnesses, Howard Mason ordered the execution and murder of Police Officer Byrne. Pappy Mason thought that the police department disrespected him, so therefore he ordered his contemporaries to go out and to kill any police officer.
Nichols was not involved in the murder of Officer Byrne, but his operation still continues to grow and to supply very dangerous street gangs with product.
We were able to establish from listening on the telephone that, in fact, Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols was communicating with core members of the conspiracy. Every week or 2 weeks, a group of individuals would go up and have meetings with him and receive orders from him in person as to how the operation was to be managed.
Agents place a microphone in the visiting room at Rikers Island. They try to listen in on Lorenzo Nichols' meetings with his lieutenants. Unfortunately, the sound quality is too poor to hear anything. Agents and police continue to build a case.
We learned their methods of distribution. We learned their methods of drug preparation. We were able to identify some of their sources of supply, who was communicating with who, how it was done, what the level of their trafficking was, who some of their customers were as a result. And it established a hierarchy of the organization for us.
Yes.
We continued to conduct surveillances related to the information that we received from the wiretap.
But surveillance is difficult. Most successful drug dealers are savvy and know how law enforcement gathers information.
The drug traffickers employ counter-surveillance techniques. They actually pay people on the street for a radius of several blocks to maintain a lookout for police authorities in the area.
When agents get enough information from the wiretap, they make arrests.
If at a time, say, for example, we intercepted a call in which there was a drug transaction occurring or a transport of drugs from one location to another location, I could say to the investigators working the case, we need to take this load off.
After 5 long months, agents meet with the prosecutor.
It was time to put some charges on some subjects, to get some cooperators, and to execute the search warrants, to get the guns, to get the drugs that'll confirm the conversations that you have.
Martinez feels they have enough probable cause to issue arrest and search warrants.
You got to know when it's time to bring the case down. And that's when we brought this case down in August.
The prosecutor agrees. It's time to take down the Nichols organization. After 5 months of investigation, Special Agent Richard Martinez plans a complex and potentially dangerous arrest operation. The goal is to completely dismantle the Nichols drug organization.
The jury needs to hear 3 things to prove guilt beyond a doubt. 1, they want the testimony of somebody inside, a cooperator. As an investigator, I want to provide tapes of the participants in the organization in their day-to-day activities. And lastly, physical evidence.
The arrest operation will hit over 20 locations. Agents believe the search warrants will give them the physical evidence they need: guns, drugs, and money. They also have arrest warrants for 38 members of Nichols' organization. They hope a few of these people will turn and become cooperators.
When a jury looks at a cooperator, the conversations that have been either intercepted through Title III or consensually recording, and physical evidence, and they all say the same thing, there's only one verdict that a jury can come back with, and that's guilty.
Agents prepare affidavits and coordinate the 400 bodies needed to execute the operation. Everyone involved understands the risks.
There's always danger when you're executing arrest warrants and search warrants. You never know how a person's going to react. That's why you go well-armed and well-equipped and with enough people to control the scenario to minimize that potential violence.
August 11th, 1988. The affidavits have been written. The arrest and search warrants have been issued. The arrest teams are prepared. Everything is in place.
Everybody knows what they're going to do, knows who they're going to pick up, knows where they have to go, and it's just time to execute.
Several of the targeted locations are very dangerous.
In this case, we deployed 3 SWAT teams in 3 locations in which we thought we might have a potential violent reaction.
The teams hit locations where drugs are being stored and sold.
Fortunately, we never tipped our hand in this investigation, so none of the defendants knew we were coming when we decided to come for them.
Nichols' sister is surprised by the arrest team. She reacts with anger.
This was a unique investigation that mothers of the main subjects of this case were involved.
My son is not even in trouble. I have to have my where's my
Lorenzo Nichols' mom was involved. Howard Mason's mother was involved. Howard Mason's mom we arrested with kilos crack cocaine and a handgun in her residence.
Please take your hand off of my hair. Please.
All over the Jamaica section of Queens, one by one, members of the Nichols organization are arrested and evidence is collected.
During the execution of the search warrants, we found guns, we found a substantial amount of packaging material, a substantial amount of crack cocaine, and numerous individuals with cash money, and seized all those items.
Lorenzo Fat Cat Nichols and Howard Pappy Mason are both arrested in prison on drug charges that will keep them behind bars forever. By the end of the day, 30 people are arrested. 5 pieces of property are seized. Nichols' sister and other key players in the organization decide to become cooperators. The multi-million-dollar violent drug operation is effectively destroyed. For Lorenzo Nichols, it was the murder of Officer Edward Byrne, a murder he had nothing to do with, that finally brought down his drug empire.
This case dismantled the Lorenzo Nichols organization. Lorenzo was convicted and went to trial. Every member of this organization that was charged was convicted and went to prison.
In 1992, Lorenzo Nichols also pleads guilty to ordering the murder of parole officer Brian Rooney. Later that same year, there is a surprising development in the Rooney murder case. Randolph Lucas is arrested on an unrelated charge and confesses his involvement in the crime. He claims his brother Eric drove the car and that he shot and killed Brian Rooney. They were hired by a Nichols associate to hurt Rooney, but they panicked and fatally shot the parole officer. No one knows why Perry Bellamy claimed to have been at the scene that night, and why he said he witnessed Howard Mason shoot Brian Rooney. The NYPD anti-drug operation and the federal task force targeting Queens drug dealers had a decided effect on drug-related crime in New York City. FBI Special Agent David Higgins.
The task force cases in New York sent the message to the streets eventually that crime doesn't pay, that if you're going to be involved in violent drug trafficking in New York City, you're ultimately going to face justice in a federal court. I believe that message resounded on the streets because the crime rate in New York City and other major U.S. cities, the violent crime rate dropped significantly in the 1990s. And it's my belief that it dropped because of all these successful prosecutions.
Brian Rooney's name was placed on the memorial for parole officers killed in the line of duty. The foundation was created in Officer Edward Byrne's name. Their legacy is the destruction of a deadly organization that threatened the neighborhoods they had sworn to protect.